Hey, Grandmasters, Mike Amori from the WCA. How are you? I want to share with you a game played between two of my students. Ben playing the white pieces, young lady named Leah playing black. These students meet with me once a week in a group of 4 players. We obviously talk about chess and learn some new ideas, etc. But most importantly is we go over their games. So these students agree to meet once a week on chesskid.com or chess.com. Really, you can do it on any site. And they play uh, 15-minute games, which means each player gets 15 minutes on their clock. The game was so instructive because when we went over it, each player made the kind of mistake that's very hard to forget in the future. And I have to just be honest with all of you. If you really want to improve at this game, there, without exception, you have to learn to lose. You have to learn to make mistakes because it's a really hard game. And as you'll see in this game, the kids kind of struggle with when it's okay to do something and when it's not okay to do something. For example, when you learn to play chess, you're taught don't bring your queen out early. That's not really true because the better you get, you're going to see examples where grandmasters will bring the queen out early. You're going to see in this very game, you're going to see a white pawn here right in front of the black king. And normally you will learn that the further up the board a pawn gets, the more dangerous it can become. But it turns out in this game that this white pawn on g7 was actually good for black. That's the kind of example I'm talking about. So these two players were so cool when we went over this game, and they're more than happy with me sharing it with all of you. So let me show you what's going on here. Leah is down a pawn. If you did the math, she's got 7, Ben has all 8. However, she does have these 2 bishops, and having 2 bishops in a position, especially if it opens, can be very, very good. However, being down a pawn, Ben has an upper hand here with white, and he probably in this position should have continued to put pressure on Leah with the move bishop to g5, which creates what we call a pin. Here, you do not want to move the knight on f6 because you'll lose your queen. So by playing bishop g5, another piece has come into the game, and the pressure has increased in black's position, correct? So Leah would have some options. Maybe she could try to chase the bishop away and the game would continue. But again, Ben being up a pawn would kind of be in charge at this point. We would say that white is better. He's not winning, but he's better. The move he played in the game, and he mentioned that he felt a little odd having the knight here because he thought that Leah was going to take it. And as you can see, when he takes back with the pawn, that the queens would come off the board. But again, had he played bishop g5 and she tries to take the knight, he of course is going to take back. But if the queens come off the board, this is actually good for him as white. Let me turn the board around. I always amaze my students with how fast I can just, set up the pieces and turn them around. Whew. Anyway, this is really good for white. And the reason is the knight is attacked, not by the bishop, but by the pawn. You cannot let the pawn take the knight. You're going to lose the game. The problem is the knight really doesn't have any good squares. It can come to this square d7, which looks reasonable, and it's probably the best move. You can put it on e8, but where's it going from e8? Look at it. You can't come here because of the pawn. If you come to d7 and attack the pawn, this gives white an opportunity to break one of those rules I was talking about, where coaches tell you, don't move pawns in front of your king early in the game and sometimes late in the game because you're going to open up your king. But that's really the cool thing about chess. The rules are not concrete. In this particular position, the white king is extremely safe on the e1 square. There are no dark square diagonal pieces for black. Look carefully. The queen has been traded. the dark squared bishop has been traded. There's really nothing that can attack the black king on these squares. He's totally safe. And don't forget, he's still up a pawn. So this little pawn mass in the middle of the board are controlling so many important squares that in the future, he could even lift his king up to connect the rooks, or of course, just castle. And I think white's doing pretty well here. So again, being afraid of that queen trade, let me reflip the board, is something that Ben should not have really been worried about. So back here, this is our starting position. He decided to avoid that by retreating the knight. So by going backwards with the knight, he makes it Leah's move. And in this position, she can get her pawn back. And that's really the price Ben is going to play for retreating the knight. And so instead of putting more pressure on, he takes it off. And how does he get the pawn back? Well, or she rather. Pause your video. Try to figure it out. Okay, my friends, you can actually get the pawn back by just taking it on e4. And of course, it looks like a complete mistake because the knight can just take. Not going to work because the knight here on e4 is on this open file. And all she has to do is simply pin the knight, and there's really no way to save it because, you can protect it, obviously, with your queen or whatever other piece you want. But whatever you do, I'm kind of making this up. Let's just say you drop your knight back. All I have to do is attack your knight with the pawn. Remember, the knight cannot move. It would put the king in check. Again, another rule. Be careful moving pawns in front of your king. Absolutely true. However, look at all of the squares that have been opened on this diagonal by playing this pawn move. Well, how does white attack those squares? The queen is in no position to do it, and Ben has already traded off his light squared bishop. Not going to work. So Leah could have gotten the pawn back right away. She didn't. Instead, let me take you back to what actually happened here. After the knight goes back to f3, I do like her move regardless of what she did. She probably should have grabbed the pawn, but her thinking was absolutely correct. She tries to open up the game. She wants the center pawns to disappear so that her two bishops can come to life and try to take advantage of the king in the middle. So what should Ben do? Once again, he should probably pin the knight, bringing more power out. Instead, what he did, and this is really the most instructive part of the game, is he played the move e5. And during the class, we were kind of talking about storm shelters. And I know that sounds bizarre for me to be doing that, but we were talking about areas in the country where you could have a chance of a tornado, for example. And a storm cellar or a storm basement is pretty much a place that you're going to go sometimes underground that can keep you protected if a tornado comes through. In chess, there is something like a tornado. If there is this enormous amount of activity in the middle, I mean, pretend the pieces can talk. Look at the tension between the pawns, right? There's like electricity here. Look at this. That pawn is attacking two of Leah's pieces. There's this incredible storm brewing in the middle of the board. Where do you want to be when that happens? Look at Leah's king. Look at Ben's king. What's the difference? Big difference. The white king is in the middle of the board. You have to be very, very careful creating like these chaotic positions when your king is vulnerable. That word obviously means if he can be attacked or if he's open. Leah decides to take the challenge, and rightly so, and says, okay, look, man, if you want to create all this chaos on the board, I'm all up for it because my king is secure. So she just takes the pawn, attacking Ben's knight. He decides to take her knight, and she takes the knight on c3. He takes the pawn. Remember I told you earlier, there's going to be a white pawn on g7. And now there is. And there's a bigger problem. That pawn is attacking a rook. You do not want this pawn taking this rook. Becoming a queen, you're going to have to take it. You're going to lose a rook. So what she did is she decided to take the pawn. Turned out to be a mistake. Why? The king is completely exposed now. And Leah got hit with the move queen to d4. She's still okay here. She's still okay. She should probably block that check with the pawn, but instead she moved her king to g8. And the problem with that idea was when those pawns got traded, do you see how it weakened all of the dark squares near Leah's king? That gives Ben a chance to attack on those squares. And the bishop attacks the rook. The rook now gives a check on e8, and he simply slides his king out of the way. Now, she's actually doing fine here. Believe it or not, she's fine, because with this king on this square, this rook in the corner is not going to play for a while. So there's a threat. This is checkmate. If the queen comes to this square, she loses. So she saw it. She's a really good player. She plays bishop f8. Ben takes. The correct way to take back was not to touch the bishop. Pause your video. What should she do here? Such a cool game. What she should do is take the queen. Get the queen off the board. Now when the knight takes the queen, you still don't have to take the bishop on f8. There's another in-between move, and that's what we call it in the chess world. It's an in-between move. There's a word in German, I think it's like Zwischenschug or something. You don't want me pronouncing the word. But in English, we say an in-between word, a move, rather. It's something you want to do, like we want to take this bishop, but we're going to do something first. So we traded the queens, that's one. Number two, instead of taking the bishop, we're going to make a bigger threat and take on b2, attacking the rook in the corner. I don't know what the rook does. Let's say it comes here to go after that pawn, which it'll win. Now you take with the king, keeping the rook on the open line. Leah's doing pretty well. If the rook takes, there's a lot of things you can do here, but black has 5 pawns, white has 5 pawns. Black has the only long-range minor piece. Leah's doing perfectly fine here. And again, this cat in the corner is going to have to come out one of these days. Not easy to get the king out. You can't move him here because of the rook. So if Leah got to this position, looks pretty good. She made a mistake, and she knew it. She took with the king. That allowed the queen in with a check. King only has one move, and now the rook checks the king. And here, Leah only has one way out of check to keep her in the game, and that was to bring the bishop out and block the check here. It's the only move she has. Instead, she made another mistake here and put her king on d7, and now she's going to lose her queen. There's a bunch of ways here, but rook to d1 came, and if you move the king, you're going to lose the queen. There's nothing you can do about it. She's kind of lost here already. She played king c6, but by doing that, it allows the queen to throw this in-between move in, check, and when the king moves out of check, she just takes the queen, or he takes the queen, and she's completely lost here. However, watch this. I'm going to take you back. Remember when that pawn took in front of the king? We learned so much from this game. This is really dangerous for black. If you recall in the game, Leah immediately took the pawn. Instead of taking the pawn, pause your video. There's a nice in-between move. And it's the move, check. Just check. Play that rook check, and now Ben's got some serious problems. Lee is actually doing much, much better. How do you get out of check? If you put the knight on this square, you're going to lose it. You definitely do not want to put the queen here. And your other two choices are either bishop to e3, which we'll look at, or king f1. King f1, it's clearly playable, but just you can just see the strength of Leah's position is so cool here. The other thing that we were talking about, let me show it to you here. Let me show you after bishop to e3. If you play bishop to e3, Leah is not going to touch this pawn. It's such a cool position. That's a white pawn. And the king is actually safer having a white pawn in front of him because that pawn can't be taken. It's like having a permanent shield in front of you. It's such a cool idea. The only thing you have to be careful about is that if that pawn ever gets protected someday and this knight can land a check, it would be checkmate because the king has no squares. But that ain't happening here, is it? No. This pawn is actually going to cover that king for the rest of the game. Now, if you block that check with the bishop, she plays the same trick on him. She plays pawn takes b2, attacking the rook. What do? You move the rook to b1, and you get hit with another check. Not pretty at all. You probably have to move your king. I don't think you want to put your knight on a square like that. If you do, there are some cool little tricks that can come up. Like, for example, we can play rook takes bishop. Looks like a beginner's move, right? Like, why would you give up a rook for a bishop? Well, you need to take it. Otherwise, you're down a piece. And if you take it, now watch this. How about bishop g4? That looks pretty cool, right? Like, what are you doing, Mr. A? You're just giving stuff away? Look at the knight. The knight is attacked twice by the bishop and the queen. If this queen is not there, that knight's going to fall, and you're going to be attacking the king. The queen has nowhere to go. She pretty much has to take the bishop. You can't move the knight because it's pinned. You can't move the queen here because of the pawn. If you take the bishop, now Leah is going to take your knight check. And look at this position for black. It's not pretty at all. Probably just bring in the last piece. And again, you have this friendly pawn in front of your king. I don't know about taking this pawn with the rook. I mean, you can try it, but then how about checkmate? All right, my friends, I hope you enjoyed the game. I know it's a long video, and I also know that this video went out to a lot of students who were just kind of working their way into the tournament scene. So maybe some of the things that I said seemed either fast or complicated. No worries. Just watch it, listen to the ideas, go to chesskid.com, go through Mike Klein or Funmaster Mike's videos, and every time you watch one, pick up an idea or two. That's it. Do some tactics, do some puzzles, and then play chess. All right, my friends, hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you again soon. Take care.